So is your glass half full or half empty? Hey, today we're talking about the power of optimism and positivity. Why should we be optimistic? And isn't just being optimistic and positive all the time ignoring all the problems that are out in the world? Well, we've got some very important information today about why being optimistic and how you look at your glass is going to change the quality of your happiness and your life. We're bringing on the CEO and founder of the Optimism Institute. Can't wait for you to get started on this. Let's rock.
Here's your host, Matt O'Neill.
So when I was in high school, I was a punk rocker. I had long hair. I played a Fender Stratocaster guitar. I hung out with punk rocker friends, and these guys also were hardcore, heavy metal. And we thought that we would make music and have a really good time doing it. And we did that. And when it came to name the band, the lead singer named our band Half Empty. And it was from this whole idea of, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? And this was kind of the 90s. The 90s was this time of grunge music where it wasn't cool to feel good or to be positive or to be happy. And it kind of goes against everything of what I stand for here at the Good Mood Show and why you're listening to this show. But it was kind of that teen angst feeling. I've recently had that question posed to me, and I got a very interesting answer. One of my friends said, "So Matt, is the glass half full or half empty?" And I said, "Well, at this point, it's no longer like my punk rock days. The glass is half full." And he said, "No, it's not half full." He said, "It's 100% full. It's got half water and half air, but that glass is full all the way." And I was like, "Oh man, he just blew my mind." Like, that is the ultimate optimist answer to, is the glass half full or half empty? And, it's a good setup for today, because today we're talking about optimism. We're talking about how to be positive from the founder and owner of the Optimism Institute, Bill Burke. Bill has come here to share his positivity and good mood vibes. And Bill, thank you for coming to the Good Mood Show.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
So, Bill, you and I are kindred spirits here. We're soul brothers. We both want to look at the glass as 100% full. What's the reason that you've chosen optimism as your outlook on life?
Well, I came to the conclusion during an academic fellowship I was doing that was a program designed to have folks like me in my stage of my career. My wife joined me on the fellowship to work on social impact projects, for things that we could do that could make the world better. And I have grown increasingly concerned by the sort of sense of doom that people are feeling, especially younger people. I have two kids in their late 20s, and seeing their friends say they don't want to have children because the world's going to end in 30 years, so why bother? And there's plenty of reasons not to have children. That's a personal choice. But if that's your reason, then I think we're in a tough space. So I thought that was an important thing for me to work on. I love storytelling. I'm generally an optimistic person to begin with. And on the glass half full, half empty, I also have yet another take on that, which is, I think sometimes it's a measure of sort of general positivity and your perspective on things. My definition of optimism includes an action, right? You don't just sit around and think things are going to get better. You have to do something about it. So my take is that an optimist looks at that glass that's half full or half empty of water, takes a big gulp, and then fills it back up. And that to me is what a true optimist does. Boy, that was a delicious glass of water. Let's go get some more. So that's how I think about optimism. But I've had a terrific time doing this work. I started a podcast called Blue Sky. We had our 50th episode. I've done one every week for the last year. And it's just been terrific. And like you said, we're kindred spirits. We talk about a lot of the same things. And I'm just really happy to be with you today.
Well, and I'm a guest on a lot of different podcasts as well. And of course, I'm the host of the Good Mood Revolution. I've written a book about how to be in good moods. A lot of times, the most common question I'll get is, "Hey, isn't it just being fake? Putting on a smile every day?" What do you say to these skeptics that say you're being fake when you're just choosing to be optimistic?
Well, anyone who knows me says I generally can't help but smile. Sometimes not the most appropriate times too, but that's just kind of how I'm wired. But
We
no,
might as
I
well
think,
lighten up the inappropriate
yeah.
times. It's
No, look,
fine, right?
look, there are always, if you're going to look for bad news, you will find it. And I find that if you're going to look for good things in the world, you're going to find that too. And frankly, in much bigger numbers. One of the challenges we have, and I come from a media background, I understand this, that negative news sells. Um, News often is defined by things that are negative. Bad things happen quickly. Good things generally happen slowly over time. So things like, the reduction in infant mortality across the world, where the numbers are staggering, that doesn't make the nightly news for obvious reasons. The news doesn't open with how many planes landed successfully today, but it would open for sure if there was a bad plane crash, God forbid, right? So that's just kind of how we're wired. So I think if you start the day looking for good news and looking for good things happening around you, you'll find it. The analogy I've used before is, if you're in the market for a big purchase, like a car, when you walk around, all you see is cars because you're thinking about cars. When you watch TV, all you notice are the car commercials, right? Same thing happens when you're in the market or you're looking for good news or good things. So when I walk around the city, I don't wear AirPods. I don't look at my phone. I look around and I see somebody help the person who dropped the grocery bag in the middle of the street, or sometimes 5 people, or the stranger who wants to pet the stranger's dog, or just the smiles on people's faces, or little kids laughing. It's all around us. But instead, a lot of us walk down the street hunched over our phones. And sometimes that could be light stuff. It could even be dogs on a skateboard, but it's not keeping in tune with what's going on around you. And I've always thought the good guys outnumber the bad guys, always have, always will, guys and gals. And if you approach life with that mindset, you'll be smiling more than you do now.
I love that. You were walking, your number one positive activity is to walk around and notice the good that's happening everywhere. And if you whatever we look for, we find. Absolutely. We're going to find it.
Yeah. And engaging with people. The smallest things, I go to a supermarket that is so busy, and the checkout people, it's like an assembly line, and they all have name tags. And if I say, "Hey, Matt, how's your day going?" It's like I've tased them in a good way. They're like startled out of it. They smile. Actually, pretty good. I'm just getting started, but or yeah, it's been kind of slow today, but I like it that way. And all of a sudden you have this back and forth. It takes 30 seconds. I feel better. They feel better. It takes nothing. And little things like that throughout the day, they say how you live your days is how you live your life. And it adds up after a while. And I don't know, it works for me.
So, this brings us to a pretty important question. Were you born this way? Did you come out of the womb smiling and chatting it up with the doctor, like, "Hey doc, how's it going today?" Or is this a skill that's developed over time?
I think it's like a lot of things. It's a little bit of both, right? I played sports growing up. I wanted to be a professional hockey player. I could have worked as hard as I wanted to at hockey. I was not going to be a professional hockey player. I didn't have all the natural gifts required. So I think like most things in life, it's a little bit of both. I remember times in my childhood where I certainly wasn't happy. Could be a little moody. I could overthink things. I was that kind of kid. But I'll tell you a funny story. And I had no memory of this. I don't have a copy of my high school senior yearbook. And we were moving my mom into an assisted living, going through a bunch of her stuff. And my sister found a yearbook that was my year. Said, "Look, it's your senior yearbook." So I grab it. Of course, I flip to the senior section, and they're the polls, class clown, class this, class optimists, myself and a young woman named Moira. And so I got goosebumps. I was like, okay, that was weird. This is a couple of months ago. So I guess I was recognized as one as a senior in high school. But I think it's a combination of both. And if I sat online all day and followed negative news stories or watched cable news people screaming at each other all day, I could spin into a pretty bad place as well. But I don't think it's good for my health, and I don't think it's good for the way I could go contribute in the world.
So I was interviewed for the senior yearbook as well, and I I was identified as one of the most likely to succeed. And when they were interviewing me, they were like, "Oh, Matt, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? You've got this, you're one of the people we've identified we think is going to be really successful out there. What do you want to do with it?" And my answer is, I just want to be happy. No matter what it is, I want to be doing it and enjoying it. And they were like, "That's not a real answer." But that's what's printed in the yearbook. Matt says when he grows up, he wants to just be happy with whatever he's doing. And I'm still that way, right? It doesn't really matter what we're doing. It doesn't matter what I do for my career. If I'm not enjoying it, it's a failure to me. And, but sometimes things are challenging. Sometimes we face some real challenges in life. How do you stay optimistic when things look their darkest?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get it a lot. A few comments on that. One is what you just said. You have to understand that that's part of life. Life has always been hard. In fact, there are many strong arguments that historically has been harder than it is today. And so I bristle sometimes at the volume and some of the types of sort of the happiness literature. And I think that the dangerous side of that is that it can make us think we're always supposed to be happy, always. It's just not the case. Life doesn't work out that way. But that expectation, I think, is a trap, especially for young people who think they're supposed to be happy all the time. They don't feel happy. They get online. Everyone looks happy online because that's what you put on. That's what
it
you
sure
put
does
online.
Look like that, right? When we go on social media, all our friends are looking like they're having the time of their life. They're in Cabo. They're at the swim up bar. They just went to the coolest restaurant. Right. So, and they were, my buddy was just hanging out with Leonard Skinner this weekend. And he's sending me pictures. He's like, "Oh, I'm hanging out with Leonard Skinner." And I'm like, "Free bird." And I'm like, "Man, he's hanging out with Leonard Skinner and I'm in a soccer game."
No, and so I said it happens to kids, it happens to adults too. And as someone said to me once, that you're comparing your insides to everybody's outsides. And it's not a fair comparison. So I think that's one of the things to remember. You're not always supposed to be happy. The other thing is that, and I just interviewed someone who gave me this expression, that time is medicine, and that over time, things will often, usually, most of the time get better. So you have to get through those tough times. And then if you go through those tough times effectively, you come out a stronger, more resilient, more empathetic person. And I shared with someone recently, and I don't talk about too much publicly, but I lost a dear niece to cancer. She was 29 years old. It was a terrible thing. 2 bone marrow transplants. It was brutal. And I was down. And it still makes me sad talking about it. And of course, I wish that had never happened. I wish Annie was still here. However, I'm a better person in so many ways because I went through that. I'm more empathetic to people. I understand what going through cancer with a loved one is like. She died just before the pandemic. And given her condition, we were wearing masks and gloves to visit her in the hospital, in 2019. When we started wearing masks during the pandemic and people would look at you funny or give you a hard time or think you were a wimp because you were wearing masks, all I could think is, what if they've got a daughter at home like my niece? They are, everyone's going through something. And when you've gone through something yourself, I think you're more empathetic. And it makes you appreciate what you have. So when I get sick and I'm not feeling well, I often think of her and what she went through, and it puts things in perspective. So that's a long answer to a simple question. But the first thing I'd say is you can't be oblivious to people's struggles, and we're all going to go through them. And so, I don't walk around with a smile on my face 24/7. I shed a lot of tears over my niece, but in hindsight, and now that I'm through it, I'm a better person for having gone through it.
Yeah, well said. I'm heavily involved in the Make-A-Wish organization. I'm on the board here in South Carolina, and my mom and I grant wishes together. And we took a young family out a couple months ago, and it was a single mother, 2 1-year-old twins, and a 3-year-old. And the 3-year-old Victor was the one that needed a wish, and her children had never been to a restaurant. So we took them out to get pizza, and we got lemonade. They had never had lemonade. Like these kids were just, they were like, what is this cup? And the 1-year-olds wouldn't let it go. And they're like, this is the most magical stuff. And, and talk about putting things in perspective. I mean, absolutely putting things in perspective. My family and I like to go out to restaurants. My kids get lemonade and they're like, oh, we can't have Coke, we can't have Sprite. And, they're complaining about the lemonade, where these children had never been out to a restaurant and lemonade was the greatest thing they'd ever had. This Victor's wish, his grandmother had prayed for him every day to heal since the time he was born. He'd never met her because they couldn't afford to get to New York. So his wish was to go meet his grandmother in New York so that she could pray over him at their church. And of course, we granted it. Yeah. And he's going to New York in a couple of weeks, and we're really excited for him. And there's some other fun stuff that he's going to get to do in New York. And but yeah, no, I'm involved in that organization specifically to put things in perspective. And one of my favorite quotes I learned from Mark Nepo, and Mark said, "When your heart breaks, it doesn't shatter, it breaks open."
Wow.
And it's that opening, opening of our hearts that then makes everything in life like more sweet, all of it. Like I'm so sorry for your dear niece, but I'm sure you appreciate every single moment you get with the people that are here and alive, like on a greater level than you possibly could have before.
Absolutely. And what you said is really beautiful. And perspective, I think, is almost everything in these situations. And another perspective I talk a lot about is historical perspective. And I interviewed a gentleman named Kevin Kelly, who has written several books. His most recent is Excellent Advice I Wish I Had When I Was Younger. And it's full of these great little, it's full, I highly recommend it. It's an easy read. It's full of these short little quotes and aphorisms. And one of them, among my favorites, is, if you only read the news, you'll think that things have never been worse. But if you read history, you'll realize things have never been better. So, which I believe completely. I was a history major in college. I'm a history buff. And it's just amazing how much progress we've made as a society, as a world. Everything from big trends like infant mortality, rates of disease. As bad as the pandemic was, and it was bad, and there are probably people listening who lost loved ones. Having said that, could you imagine if the pandemic had happened in 1975? 3 or 4 channels of TV, no internet, no way of really communicating as effectively about this problem. We'd still be looking for a vaccine with 70s technology. And we haven't totally moved on, but we've made incredible progress in a very short period of time. And yet we complain, or we talked about this offline. When people say this country's never been more divided than we are today, it makes my skin crawl. We fought a civil war for 4 years. By the way, in my lifetime, I wasn't old enough to remember it. The summer of 1968, this country was in a terrible shape. There were riots all over the place. With the 68 Democratic Convention was chaos. Bobby Kennedy assassination, these things, the Vietnam protests. We think we're so divided now about, Gaza and Palestine and some of the tough things we're dealing with, which I'm not trying to trivialize. But the Vietnam War nearly tore this country apart in terms of generations, in terms of views on the war. So when we say things just casually like it's never been worse, I just want to say, I really think you could use a better historical perspective.
Yeah, and we were talking about this. I absolutely agree with your assessment. And I was telling you, my wife and I went and saw Hamilton, the play. And in Hamilton, if our politicians had a disagreement and they disagreed about everything, just like they do today, it wasn't just that they would argue it out on a podium. No, they said, "I challenge you, sir, to a duel." And they would walk out in the street at noon on a Tuesday and fire guns at each other. And one of them would be shot and killed. A politician was going to fight to the death. And this was just a couple hundred years ago. So let's talk about now the optimistic implication of this. And as I was telling you, I just got back from Ireland, and the entire history of Ireland is one of being beaten by England over and over and over again, a potato famine. They're the only country now that has fewer people today than they had in 1840. There's more people from Ireland living outside of Ireland than there are in Ireland. That's how many people were fleeing because conditions were so bad, politically and socially, economically. But now if you look at Ireland, everything's settled. They're not fighting anymore. Nobody's dying of famines, and it's really a pleasant place. And this has only happened probably in the last 75 years for the people of Ireland. Probably you look at the United States, it's the same way. We had 2 world wars at the beginning of the 1900s. As you mentioned, there was Vietnam. This is probably like one of the most peaceful times in the history of humanity. Well, yeah, I'm an optimist. You're an optimist. What do you think the next 50 years are going to be? Probably better.
It's a great question. Yeah, I think, absolutely. I think it's inexorable. I interviewed a gentleman named Charles Kenny, and he's written several books. One's called Getting Better, that's on this subject. And a lot of it's about international global health developments and those sorts of things. And I was talking to him about how I got into this work and about concerns about young people. And he said, that in particular frustrates me. And he said something, stopped me in my shoes. He said, tracks. He said, that frustrates me because that generation coming through high school, college should be the greatest generation in the history of the world. I thought, okay. And he said, they're the largest in number. They will have the longest lifespans. They are the most tech savvy. They're the most socially accepting. He said, minus, they get a little hung up on some free speech things, but he said, the most accepting of social differences. And he said, if they're optimistic and lean forward and work on these things, they're going to fix the problems that we've left for them.
I want to spend some time giving some practical advice about how to become more optimistic and more positive. So first of all, let's just real quick, what are the benefits to the person who says, all right, I want to have a more rosy outlook? Why would you want a more positive, optimistic outlook in the first place? And let's talk about some ways to do it.
Well, to me, it's a better way to live. It's just, you just feel better. There's pretty hard data that you'll live a longer life. The incidence of cardiovascular disease, people with a positive outlook. It's a selfish position to take in some ways. It's good for you. It is truly good for you. I think people prefer to be around more optimistic people. So if you want to make friends and influence people, be more positive. I interviewed Burke Jacobs, who co-founded the Life is Good company. He said, talk about leadership. He said, I always challenge people, show me the list of history's great pessimists. He said, I've yet to receive one. So those are some reasons right there.
Show me the list of history's great pessimists. That's awesome. Yeah. So we're gonna when we're feeling optimistic, we feel great. And we inspire others and they feel great. We go out and we create things. We make the world a better place. And so basically, when we're feeling pessimistic and we're seeing the glass is half empty, we're dragging other people down with us because we're
not looking for solutions.
We want to complain and blame and point fingers and say they did it to me. And then when we do that, we sit and stew rather than make things better.
Exactly. And
I just want to put this out there. If you're listening to this, I've certainly been a pessimist. I've certainly get into negative spirals. There are certainly times I point my finger at others and say, it's your fault. So I'm not saying this from like, I'm better than thou. I'm not. I struggle with the exact same things we all struggle with, but I want to talk with great optimists. I want Bill to come onto the show. I want to hold the Good Mood Show so that I'm talking to people who are thinking about the positive side of things so I can become that and be happier and uplift those around me. So if you struggle with this like I do, let's listen to some pretty practical tips about how to get better.
Yeah. So another big one is social media. And I think it's sort of a lost cause to say, get off all social media and put your phone away forever. That's just not practical. It's not going to happen.
My brother has a flip phone.
Yeah. God bless him. I mean, that's, yeah. I would think about it. I always get bogged down with, there's the map function. There are all these other things that'd be hard to live without, I think. However,
he never graduated to the iPhone or the Android. He stuck with the flip phone because he just saw that for him, he didn't want to be on call at work after
yes,
work
I get
hours
that.
and on the
Yeah,
weekend. So he never got the phone that allowed email. And then now it's been so long that he just is doing without, and he's doing pretty good.
I bet he's doing great. So if though it's a given that you're going to spend some time on social media, and there are many positive things to get out of it, that's part of it. Is look at your feed, look carefully at your feed. Who are you following? How do they make you feel? What kind of things are they posting? And when I started this optimism work, I intentionally cleaned up my feed. And just as these algorithms can spin you down in a dark place, the opposite can happen. And all of a sudden, and back to my analogy about looking for a car, guess what else happens when you're in the market for a car? You start seeing ads in your social media feed. Now, you don't know if Alexa's eavesdropping on you or why that's happening, but it happens. And likewise, when you start following more positive people, solutions-oriented people, it starts spinning up. And then you start finding people like Matt O'Neill who have a podcast that you weren't familiar with before, or all these good news websites and all these people doing great things in the world. It's a game changer. I mean, it truly, it makes a huge difference. And when you can, put the phone away. I get very sad when I'm out at a restaurant or a public place and I see a family, they're going out for dinner, and then they all pull out their screens. That to me makes me sad. I think that personal interaction is a key, and there's a lot of research on that.
Well, let's talk about how hard that is, because the dopamine hits we get from getting a new email and getting a new like and seeing a new story are I think just as powerful as the addiction to cigarettes. So it's not just easy to say, go ahead and put your pack of cigarettes away and sit on your hands. So what are some tips that you have to like counteract how addictive it is to pull out our phone and look at it? I can't remember how many times a day, but it's like hundreds of times a day. We have to touch our phone and look at it to see if anything happens. Yeah. That's how addicted we are.
Yeah, I mean, there's some, there are apps that you can put time limits. You can do time limits by app, which I think is helpful. So if
I got that tip. I put a 15-minute time limit on all social media for the whole day, and it worked. I know that the time limit's only 15 minutes a day, and so when I open a social media app, I'm like, I got a couple seconds to get in and get out, and then I got to get out because it's going to use up my whole time today, which is helpful because I'm not sitting there doing the doom scroll. And they call it a doom scroll because you scroll and compare yourself to everyone else, and then you just feel bad.
Yeah, and I think that absolutely. And I think another thought is, have your places where it's off limits, like at the dinner table, like have times, and maybe you have to put it where you can't reach it. Stick it in your sock drawer, or alerts. I think are terrible. The buzzes and the beeps, and it's everything from a buzz for emails that you don't really need to read, or sometimes worse, the news alerts. Rarely do you get a news alert, if ever, that's good news. A. B. Rarely is it an alert that is at all actionable. It's one thing to have weather alerts and there's a tornado coming, or, I don't know, some disaster that you need to be worried about. But more often than not, it's a news story that you have no influence over. There's nothing you can do about it. And you get the buzz, your heart speeds up, you read it, you get upset. And it's all for no particularly good reason.
But it's addicting. So when we do get upset about the news alert, it puts cortisol and adrenaline in our bloodstream, and those two chemicals are very addicting. So we're addicted to the alerts. I love that piece of advice, though. So if you're listening to this show, I don't have any of those little red icon badges show up on any of my apps. When I have new email, I don't have a little red icon. When I get new social comments, there's no red icon. My phone doesn't ding when I get a text message. My phone doesn't ring when someone calls me. And you're like, well, then I get this argument back. Well, what if somebody really needs to get a hold of me? My wife can ring through when I'm on no notifications as an emergency contact. My mom can ring through as somebody who's an emergency contact. My children can ring through as emergency contact. Now, I do let them know, hey, when I'm at work, my phone's on silent. I could be in the middle of an important meeting talking to Bill Burke. And if you call me at that time, text me if it's not something super immediate, because your phone is going to ring and I'm going to hear it and I'm going to answer because it's going to be important. So if you are trying to struggle with how could I just turn off all these notifications, you can do that. And then you can specify certain people to ring through for emergency.
Yeah, all great advice. There's so many tools out there that we don't use. Some are built right into the Apple or Google interfaces, and some you go out and purchase an app or get a free app. Back to historical perspective too. What did we do when we were kids? What did we do?
We went outside and played. I went out. I got on my bike, and I went down with my baseball bat, and we all met at the open field. And we played wiffle ball every single day in the spring and summer. And then we played football every single day in the fall. And that's just what we did. Right. We were outside.
And in our parents' generation, they went to work. They did their thing. They weren't reachable all day. They weren't reachable all weekend.
No one could get a hold of us. My mom, she just had to trust that we would come home at dinner.
We had a bell. My mom had a bell. And, the neighborhood was of a size that if she rang the bell, we actually had for a time, it didn't stick, but we had like one ring for the oldest, two rings for the next. That's how we knew who was being summoned. Yeah, but it sounds goofy and old fashioned. But again, you didn't need to be on call all the time. And I think there's this sense of sort of self-importance around some of these. Oh, I'm so important. They must be able to reach me.
Well, and then safety, right? So when I was a kid, my mom was like, yeah, you guys can just go on a bike ride and I'll see you later. Now in this day, it's like my wife is having to release a little bit of this control and say, yeah, you can go on your bike, but you better take your iWatch so that I can track exactly where you are and nobody's going to take you. I think maybe that's part of what being more connected has taught us, is that there, as you said, the news is usually telling us about the plane crash or the child who was abducted. In my day, you never heard about all the children that were abducted because there wasn't. Not everyone knew about it, so we just kind of assumed things were safe. So maybe it's a little bit better that we do know what's going on so we can protect ourselves, but we don't want to stay so connected to all that negativity either. All right, so stay off social media. Is there one other practical everyday tip that we should be thinking about for how to become more optimistic?
Yeah, I think read more history, study history, understand history, put things in context. You mentioned Hamilton. They got some criticism because they only make passive reference to slavery. And they have a fun tongue-in-cheek moment early on when they talk about putting women in the sequel to the Declaration of Independence. Women weren't voting until the 20th century, not voting. So try to put things in historical perspective whenever you can and appreciate where we are with longevity, with vaccines. I mentioned losing my niece, where we are in cancer care. When we freak out about things like AI, think about how we freaked out about radio when it started, how about television when it started.
About Y2K. We thought the world was going to end.
Y2K. We think the climate change is going to end the world. Go back any 100 years, or all the people, the Armageddon people. None of these things has happened. And so I think historical perspective, it's a big lift for a lot of people. A lot of people don't have a lot of time to read or interest. But whenever you can, try to put things today in historical perspective. And I just about guarantee you'll feel better.
Bill, it's been such a fun, optimistic, positive conversation. Love your smile. There are people that are going to want to get more connected to the work you're doing in the world. How could people get in touch?
Oh, thanks. Well, the optimisminstitute.com and the Blue Sky podcast, which is available wherever you get your podcasts. And we put them out every week. And and then follow the Optimism Institute on social media. I have made a deal with social media that I have to use that product for good. And so I'm on all your favorite platforms, the Optimism Institute. We do a lot of fun tongue-in-cheek stuff there, and I'll promote the podcast and tell some more positive stories to clean up your feed a little bit.
I love it. Yeah, I love it, Bill. And I loved your advice on social media. I've taken that to heart. And anytime I see someone and I get a weird feeling, I just unfollow.
Bingo.
And as soon as I do that, and I do think the algorithm is really smart, it starts to notice the things that give me weird feelings and starts to show me less of that stuff. And then when I purposefully like things that are positive and that are telling positive stories, and the algorithm also then starts to show me more and more positive things. So I agree, you can get uplifted and learn a lot through social media if you're doing it the right way.
No doubt.
Bill, thank you for being here. Y'all, hope you feel as great as I do, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode with Matt O'Neill.